Treasures of the Four Crowns, created by the same team that made Comin' At Ya, which was a huge hit for its day, and was the reason there was a brief resurgence in 3D in the early 80s. This was the follow-up, funded by Canon Studios, the same company responsible for Superman and RoboCop. No longer an independent production, this was to be a supercharged return of the kings of 80s 3D. And by God, they tried. They really tried. They threw everything imaginable at the screen. And although this voyage may have been doomed, this ended the career of its star and producer, he did set out for a noble cause, to create the greatest 3D movie ever made. The first 20 minutes, my God, the first 20 minutes feeling less like a movie and more like an old school demo reel with an imaginative Dungeons and Dragons adventure set with the camp factor so high it would make Joe Exotic blush. It's the candle of doom, of doom, of doom. Ah! They just keep throwing it at you over and over again. It's an almost unimaginable barrage of 3D ham. Damn it, if this wasn't the ham factory with the farmers trucking in fresh meat as fast as it will grow. This movie doesn't just ham it up. It may, in fact, be the pig itself, the source of all ham. The intrepid 3D viewer should be warned before venturing up this holy mountain. It may, in fact, scar your stereo-perceiving eyes. There's nothing quite like Treasures of the Four Crowns. For better or worse, it stands as a crown jewel, if not the crown jewel of 80s 3D cinema. The stereo, perhaps in large part to the efforts of the 3D film archive, is very watchable. Like its predecessor, Comin' At Ya, I found some moments work better on different displays. If you happen to have a big display, you may benefit from moving your chair further away for this one. Perhaps open a window and watch it from the lawn. There are pop-out moments that look great on small screens, but were a bit too much to be enjoyed in that living room. On the flip side, I found small TVs seem to highlight alignment and color discrepancies on the more conservative shots, where on the bigger screens, well, nothing could be considered conservative as the depth never left the spotlight. Apparently, one of the lenses they used had a tendency to skew vertical alignment the further things got from the camera, so an arrow coming at you may start its journey a bit off kilter before coming together when it hits your nose. Again, if I heard right, this is one of the things the 3D archive worked to correct as much as possible. It's tempting to be dismissive of this over-the-top style in the present day when our bellies are full of tightly controlled digital 3D. But none of these shots were simple or easy. This wasn't kids running around in the backyard. This was state-of-the-art 3D at the time, with components being invented as needed, spending massive amounts of money and throwing away a lot of what was filmed. Scenes had to be redone again and again. Every one of these needed to be executed with calculation and precision. And many were only possible because of the experience that was gleaned from making Comin' At Ya, all done with props and practical effects. There were no green screens, no optical overlays, no animation, and of course computers were not yet fit for graphics. Compare the shots in this to any contemporary film of the day, Jaws 3 or Friday the 13th 3. Each might have had at most a dozen wow shots. This has more in its first 5 minutes. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this might have more pop-outs than every 80s 3D film combined. But it took its toll. There's a lengthy interview included on the disc where the star and producer talks about how difficult it was to make, both technically and financially. When it was all done, he sat alone in the dark set and drank himself drunk. And although an idea for another 3D movie was floated around, he would ultimately decide, perhaps accurately, that there just wasn't enough theaters to make the work worthwhile. He noted that most screenings of Treasure were shown flat, and he makes no bones about this being a gimmick film. This was made to be seen in 3D and only 3D. He worked his shoes off to make a stereo event. This isn't the greatest story ever told. It's the most insane 3D circus ever committed to film. Outrageous? Yes. Obnoxious? Yes. Indulgent? Oh, yes. And all on purpose and by design. So to go to all that effort and just not have the theaters play along was disheartening. I suppose a little more attention to the drama couldn't have hurt, but even if they did, no one would be digging this up today to see another indie clone. Hell, no one even wants to see another indie today. This was made for a 3D enthusiast, and it is those enthusiasts that have resurrected this back to life, and it is those enthusiasts that will keep this alive long into the future. In a way, this movie does feel like it was put together a bit backwards. After such an eye-expanding blast of an opening, everything else in the movie is doomed to feel scenic but pedestrian. Although they never stop assaulting the camera, it all ends up in a mostly gymnasium-type room that felt a bit bare and just not all that special, and it certainly didn't feel dangerous, although as I understanding that filming it absolutely was risky. They were grappling off the ceiling. There was no budget to build a fake facade at ground level, so the entire ending was essentially an extended stunt shot that they had to practice for weeks. But for me, the worst choice of the movie is having that area lit by a mild strobe. It's never quite a full strobe. The room lights stay on, so it's only a constant flicker noticed mostly in the highlights, but enough to be unwelcome. 3D doesn't like flashing light, and I'm surprised they didn't notice how off-putting it was during filming. There's no dialogue for the first portion of the movie, and I couldn't help but feel this would have worked much better if they kept it that way. It does have a nice music score by Ennio Morricone. I probably butchered that, though at times I felt that music was mismatched with what I was actually seeing, almost as if it was ripped from another movie and arbitrarily cut in. Incidentally, the movie worked well when I produced my own soundtrack, a la the Wizard of Oz effect. In fact, I challenge you to watch this movie on mute while playing some atmospheric type music of your own. Pink Floyd is a good choice. I also found an album called Passengers from the 90s worked quite well too, and actually even more upbeat and even destructive music matches well with large parts of this movie. The story can be described as indeterminate. However, I wonder if it may have had a little more influence on the 80s than has been thought. Its big bad guy features this triangle symbol that anyone who's played video games in the past 40 years will recognize as the Triforce from The Legend of Zelda. Although it's a common symbol in Japan, it wasn't really a religious symbol, which is how it's presented here and in Zelda. The movie also features henchmen who wear pig masks, which give them the look of a moblin, which is one of the more common enemy foot soldiers in the Zelda games, especially the early ones. The premise is collect the jewels from 4 crowns to open up a thing. In Zelda, Link must collect 8 pieces. Eventually, this culminates in sneaking inside the evil boss's lair, like they do in the movie, and eventually confronting him with this newfound power. This was released in 1983, and the first Zelda game began its development in 1984. 3D, extremely popular in Japan. Only a few short years later, Japan would be the only place in the world where you could get a home player that played 3D. Could this movie have inspired Zelda? In fact, if you dressed the cast up as elves, this really could have passed as a cheesy 80s era adaptation of the game. We can only wonder. 9